Hey everyone, in this documentary, I will be answering questions about the Black Death, hoping that this information informs people of its origins and effects on Europe in the Middle Ages. Let's get into it. What is the Black Death? Well, the Black Death, also known as the bubonic plague, was a pandemic that devastated Europe in 1347 that killed around 25 million people throughout the years. How did the plague start? The plague was caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. The disease was likely transmitted to humans by the bites of infected fleas or rats. It just so happens that during the Middle Ages, rats basically coexisted with humans. The first appearance of the plague was at a Sicilian port. When the ships arrived, majority of the sailors aboard were dead. Those still alive were gravely ill and covered in black boils that secreted blood and pus. How did it spread so quickly? The disease was able to spread rapidly because it adapted and transformed into three highly contagious and lethal forms of plague. Plagues and pandemics by Ancient History Encyclopedia explains a bite by an infected flea was a form of a bubonic plague. Coming into contact with an infected animal or person was a septicemic plague. And finally, a pneumonic plague was obtained through inhaling infected respiratory droplets such as a cough or sneeze. What were the symptoms? The initial symptoms of the plague were fever, headache, chills, weakness, muscle aches, and painful lymph nodes. The most severe and prominent symptoms were boils and the blackening of tissue such as fingers, toes, and nose. How did it spread geographically throughout Europe? As we mentioned earlier, the first appearance of the plague was on ships and ports. Therefore, as the graph demonstrates, I would conclude the plague was mostly prominent on the coast and made its way inwards into the region. How did the disease affect society? Ancient History Encyclopedia's article, Effects of the Black Death on Europe, reveals the negative effects the plague had on Europe. Let's analyze a couple. Obviously, a major consequence from the plague was the amount of fatalities. During the plague, the division amongst people led to riots, chaos, corruption for power, and consumption and production were negatively affected. Also, religions were in conflict with one another to an extent of blaming Jews for the spread and even executing them through burning them. What kind of approaches were taken against the disease? Ancient History Encyclopedia's article, Medieval Cures for the Black Death, demonstrates the different types of treatment approaches that were used to reduce the spread of the disease. Plague doctors tried medicinal approaches such as potions, bloodletting, paste, and etc. However, during the Middle Ages, hygiene was poorly practiced, and medical treatments were usually ineffective. Some religions believed the plague was from God as a punishment. Some tried exorcism, or, like the Flagellants, a religious extremist group that emerged during the Middle Ages, would practice lashing themselves with whips as a retribution for their sins. It eventually became common to mark the doors of infected households with a red cross, along with God have mercy upon us, to demonstrate the household was a victim of the plague. Overall, populations could not keep up with the increasing amounts of fatalities, and it proved difficult to produce a treatment to reduce the spread of the plague. How did the pandemic end? Any lasting effects? There is no definitive answer that explains how the plague ended, but many speculate people adapted immune defenses against the plague. The effects of the plague led people to reach the limits of inhumanity and proved that it would be difficult for Europe to recover. Well, we've reached the end of the documentary. I hope you found it informative and learned something new from it. And remember, as Sean Martin states in his book, The Black Death, new biological threats to humanity can appear at any time.